association. This segment is all about Kenneth Burke and the Pentad.
Another piece of Kenneth Burke's theory that I think is really fascinating is the Pentad, which is his notion, and he writes it, he talks about it in his writings, how he was inspired by Shakespeare and the famous line from Shakespeare that all the world's a stage and we're but merely players. And Burke says he started thinking about that and realizing that much of our communication can be understood as how we attribute, kind of like the parts of a play. So we have the scene, and we have the actors within the scene, and we have the motivations for the characters, and we have kind of the whole sense of what, it's almost like, a murder mystery. What was done, who did it, where did it take place, what was the motive, right? And so Burke starts thinking about all these things, and he comes up with this 5-piece. So it's act, and it's scene, and it's agent or actor. It's purpose, act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose. So the how. And it's kind of like the reporter's questions, like who, what, where, when, and how. And so what I love about teaching that is that, to me, I think Burke hit upon something that there's really only 5 explanations that we can offer. So he says that anytime, especially somebody says, well, what happened? Or why did you do it? That we can offer one from each of those explanations. And it's all about sort of how do we apply the blame to something, or how do we explain what the cause of something. So an example I often use to get my students to start thinking about this in a really simple level is to say, let's say that you are a panel of experts on like a talk show or a news show. And the topic of the day is why there's young people who are committing crimes. And so the example that I give is, let's say you give the setup in the show is the moderator says, well, here's the story of young Jim who broke into a liquor store and stole all, and so experts tell us why he did it. Right? And so Burke would say there's 5 ways that those experts can answer it. From an act perspective, you would put the emphasis on just what was done. Well, things like this just happen, and no one can really explain why. It could be this, it could be that cause, and you focus in on just what was done. The agent would put the blame on the young man and would say, well, he's a bad kid. He has just evil intentions. We got to lock those criminals away because this is going to keep happening unless we're tough. It was all his fault. Right? Now compare that perspective to expert number 3, who says, oh no, poor Jim came from a broken family. He's impoverished. It's a terrible neighborhood, right? And so you have to look at the elements, right, in his upbringing that might have caused him to do that. So notice the difference between he's a bad kid and, it was the circumstances that created him. So that's an emphasis on the scene outside of him. The 4th one would be the how, the agency. So that expert might say, well, it doesn't matter about his personality, or it doesn't matter about what caused him to do it. What's really important, and this person might say, at least he wasn't violent. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't hurt anybody. Right, so an emphasis on the how. He just broke in, he did it, he took a few things. He really doesn't deserve the kind of punishment that this expert number 2 said he should get, right? So that would be number 4. How did he do it? Did he use a weapon? Not, right? Did he go in through the window? Did he hurt anybody? Right? Number 5 would be purpose. And that one could be all different kinds of things. But Burke says sometimes we attribute causality to, I did this because there was some higher sense of justice, or there was some higher sense of motivation, maybe a religious motivation. So at one extreme, you might say God spoke to him and he was listening to a voice, right? Or he was mentally ill and he thought he heard voices, right, that led him to do this. Or the other way, I think about this as, if you know the Les Miserables, right, and Jean Valjean, I think of this as that defense. I stole the bread, right? I broke into the liquor store, but I did it because I needed the money, because I needed to feed my family, right? So there's this higher sense of justice. Or yes, I broke a law. This is what the civil rights protesters would say. Yes, we broke a law, but we did it to prove a higher sense of freedom, right? That it's a bad law. So yes, I did it, but I did it for freedom of speech, or I did it for this higher principle, right? So again, think about the setup. 5 different experts, and Burke would say those 5 terms of the Pentad give you a sense for what's the causality that explains in each case, right? Which makes it fascinating, because then Burke says when we argue about something, we're often coming from different perspectives that can be explained by what term of the Pentad is underlying how we see the world, right? So if we always see it as people are responsible for what they do, we're always going to be constructing an actor or an agent perspective. But if we see the world as, the circumstances are always important, we tend to see the world from a scene view. And those two people are going to argue with each other, because their fundamental way of thinking about causality is different. And that's why we argue, right? And so that's what I think is so fascinating about the Pentad, is you begin to see how it exposes how people view the world and explain the elements in the same situation or the same question, but can come at it from completely different viewpoints.